on tomorrow's Western Planning meeting, and that is, I think if the public sat at home trying to watch it on the webcast found it all decipherable, that we'd get quite a lot of criticism for it. We probably wouldn't pick up a lot of criticism from overview and scrutiny meetings, because
the thing is, Councillor Hyman, that us webcasting is actually not, we do not have to webcast.
Absolutely, but if we're asking people not to attend the chamber in person,
we're not. That is the point. We're not telling people not to attend the chamber. We're telling them that it's personal preference whether they do or not.
Right, that's not a great advert for the council either way. We've done it fairly successfully.
No, I totally agree with you. I do agree with you.
No, I think you're right. We probably legally don't have to, because the COVID laws have all been repealed, haven't they? I think so. I don't think there's any real legal requirement for us to webcast it, but I think people expect it because we've done it for years. We led it back 15 years ago with webcasting, and it's been a trial and a trial and error for many years. But technology these days would have hoped perhaps for a bit better than we've got. I suppose our system's old. That's the problem now.
Can everybody hear C1?
We can.
Excellent. Right, I shall now leave you alone. Richard, there's seat there. I'm not going to. I will log in into my office.
Right, let's crack on then. Okay.
So anybody who's sitting this side will be in a blind spot, just so you know. So you'll be heard but not seen. Many officers do that.
Right, shall we crack on then, please? Apologies for a late start, but if you can't hear what's being said because the technology, I can't really hold the meeting there. So go to the agenda, please. So agenda item 1 is the minutes. That's the minutes at the meeting held on the 21st of March 2022. Have we had time to go through those? Have you got any amendments or any comments on them? Okay. So apologies for absence and substitutions. Kim.
Thank you, Chairman. We have apologies from Councillor Ruth Reid, and Councillor Joan Hegan is substituting.
Thank you. Any declarations of interest, Kim?
None, Chairman.
Excellent. Questions from members?
None, Chairman.
Excellent. And I'll take it no questions from members.
No.
Excellent. If we could get through the next 5 items this quick, I'll be pleased. Okay. Agenda item number 6, the committee forward work programme, which is pages 7 to 10. Mark, would you like to introduce that, please?
Yeah, basically, as you probably deduced, because it's a new municipal year, I've reset this document essentially. So all the previous actions, resolutions, and the like are still valid, but they're not recorded on this new version, so it doesn't get too cluttered. It will sort of fill up progressively between now and next May. This is probably also the lightest of the upcoming items that we're going to look. So if you have any ideas of things you'd like to get put on for future, now's as good a time as any.
And I know we've got 6 items already for September, so they're starting to fill up September quite nicely. Number 2, the PSPO in Godalming. I know there's concerns about the impact on Elstead, how it's sort of moved the problem makers from Godalming to Elstead. And I believe Councillor Gale has put that forward that it should be extended. So we just need to bear that one in mind when we look at the update. But I would like some sort of view on the impact on surrounding areas, if you could ask him to do that. Okay, any views?
No, just to add to that, that they're also in farming. You know, some of the trouble we've had, we've assumed they were local, and then when we've spoken to them, they've come in from government. So there is some thought on effect. So I would endorse that one. Have a look to see what the effect is.
Okay, Councillor Darcy.
Did you said Elsted?
I think it was Elsted.
It seems quite a long
Sorry,
way.
yeah, sorry, my apologies. I haven't got the papers. It's where Councillor Gale, which is Milford, isn't it? Milford, and
I was trying to rack my brains as to what I've heard.
I know he has mentioned it in one of the meetings.
It's Milford, the next village up.
Okay. Well, we're just,
If I may, Chair, you could at least come every 2 months now to exec brief, and we asked for evidence to justify that, and there is some for Milford, but less so for other areas. And if there was a request from ONS to seek evidence to extend and monitor the PSPO, I think that would be appropriate.
well, you know, it wouldn't be us to do it. Obviously, it would be the Safer Waiver Partnership, as it's involved. So if we can try and capture what evidence is being put, 'cause I think it's only right Councillor Gale has raised it. Anything else from anybody else? Okay, so we'll move on then.
Chairman, sorry, I'm really sorry. I know it's not appropriate. I just wanted to. I have my name next to number one, affordable housing SPD, but I wasn't aware we're working on an affordable housing SPD in planning at the moment. So I just wanted to query that we had an affordable housing SPD. It was adopted a year ago. So I'm just questioning whether or not that's a mistake. Sorry about that.
That probably is a mistake. That probably got.
Sorry, Chairman.
Yeah, that's probably got carried over from an old version when it shouldn't. So,
Okay.
so
well,
I'd
if we
recommend
can just-
removing that.
Yeah, well, check first.
Yeah.
Before we remove it, check first.
Thank you, Chairman.
Our pleasure. Corporate performance report, pages 11 to 92. So we've got heads of services outline areas of note. I have to admit, when I went through that, I had quite a few areas I was concerned about. Mark, who's going to start off?
I'm behind you.
And that's it's a bit off-putting actually when you can't see the.
Let me perch here. Apologies, councillors. So the service, so the corporate performance report for the last quarter is also the performance report for the whole year. It's the outturn report. So there are reflections from heads of service, the remit of this committee, and the chief executive's narrative at the beginning pulls a whole lot of stuff together about how much work has been done in the year. I'd normally at this point say I will leave it totally to the heads of service present to present their particular items. We seem to be a little thin on. Oh no, I do think it's problem. It's Richard there. I didn't think you were there.
Richard, poised.
He's just poised, ready, I'm sure. So apologies. Let me hand over to the heads of service here.
Okay, Richard, the floor is yours.
Which page are we starting with?
Well, he can talk us through that.
Sorry, I didn't realise I was first on. Sorry.
That's right. And if you could just indicate which page you are talking about, so we can keep up with you.
Right. I'll just find it for myself. Bear with me a second.
Environmental services is on page 69 of your agendas, 55 of the actual report.
69. I'm getting there, Chair. Right, somewhere, here we go. Thank you, Chair. So it is page 69 off the agenda, it's the first page. which is a very detailed summary of performance over the year. And what I've tried to do is illustrate with some statistics in there the volume of work that's been done by the various teams, and also the nature of that work, the sorts of things they've been dealing with. And obviously the environmental health, food and safety team was very much focused on COVID regulation at the start of last municipal year. But as the year progressed, they reverted from COVID regulation to their substantive role in terms of food safety enforcement, health and safety enforcement, and helping businesses get back to some sort of normality. There was a big swing towards home catering and home deliveries during COVID, but that's tending to revert back now to hospitality in restaurants and takeaways and that sort of thing. So very much finding that food safety standards had fallen during COVID, probably understandable, but part of the challenge is now to get those things back on track and move things forward. There's been quite a few accidents reported during that period for them, and one particularly nasty one where 2 children have had their fingers trapped indoors, and in one case a partial amputation. So there's a piece of work going on that could end up in court with that one, and a number of infectious diseases other than COVID also happening still, with E. coli and food poisoning and that sort of thing, which that team have been heavily involved in. On the pollution side of things, you'll see almost 3,500 complaints dealt with by the environmental protection team, predominantly around noise, around planning consultations, temporary events going on, that sort of thing, bonfires. So certainly an awful lot of work being done by that pollution team as well. The licensing team has had to support the taxi and private hire trades during the pandemic to help them keep going. Certainly visiting licensed premises with the environmental health team to ensure people are complying with the COVID requirements during that period. Our emergency planning team were obviously a key player during the COVID period, and our contingency and business continuity plans were all enacted and put in place, and certainly we managed to continue business as usual in many areas during COVID, thanks to the pre-planning and the business continuity plans we had, and all of the IT support that enabled people to work from home and that sort of thing as well. Obviously the waste service, everyone's familiar with the fact that we did manage to keep it going with minimal disruption during COVID. Many other local authorities ended up suspending services and all sorts of things going on, but we managed with Biffa's help to keep things going on the waste side. Although to do that, we did have to relax our street cleaning standards to some extent. And we're now in discussion with Biffa about improving those street cleaning standards and getting them back up to scratch. But I think it's important to recognise that we're not actually out of the wood yet with COVID. And in fact, in recent weeks, COVID cases are actually going up again. And that does have a knock-on effect on the refuse collectors. Firstly, if one person in the cab gets it, almost inevitably the whole crew in the cab get it. And that then means that they use relief crews to do the work who don't know the areas, and that leads to more missed bins, etc. So it's a vicious circle there. But the important thing is to recognise that whilst most of us have returned to some sort of normality, there are some services which can be impacted significantly by the remaining presence of COVID infections going forward. But I think overall the council's recognised that Biffa have done a pretty good job keeping things going over the last 2 years. It's not been without hiccups, but it's been a lot better than a lot of other authorities have managed to achieve. Parking services have obviously had a busy time recently catching up with things. Parking income and parking use hasn't recovered to pre-COVID levels. There's still a way to go. We're around 70–75% back to where we were. So changes in people's habits may well have impacted on the demand for parking. And that's something we're watching very closely at the moment. We're busy working on the Brightwells multi-storey car park and working with Crest and their contractors to make sure that's going to be ready for use when they hand it back to the council. And then the sustainability team has been doing a lot of work around the carbon neutrality action plan, working with other departments to encourage sustainability projects such as the carbon retrofit on the Memorial Hall, combined heat and power units and all sorts of stuff going on there, and working on some solar panel projects as well in the background. So an awful lot going on across the service, and hopefully that report gives you a general feel for what's going on. I'm happy to answer any questions on that, Chair, and then move on to the performance indicators if people wish.
Brilliant, thank you for that, Richard. I don't know how many complaints we've had. There were noisy dogs.
I do apologise. Yeah, I'll close the door.
No, that's absolutely fine. I've got a couple of questions, but Councillor Wells had her hand up first, and then Councillor Coburn, and then over to you.
Thank you. A couple of questions, please, Richard. Could you just remind me which local authority now looks after our out-of-hours service? With handling
Bracknell.
Bracknell
District Council. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, Bracknell Forest. Thank you. So the other question I had was, we note that the COVID has presented us with a problem with these crews, and it really is a difficult one, I know. Weekend working. Now that probably involves overtime. Is that included in the contract, or is that an extra cost to us, or how is that managed?
No, any overtime that Biffa pay their crews for catching up at weekends is paid for by Biffa, not the council.
Okay, thank you. Good, that's fine. Just got one other thing to say. I know you know how important it is to get out and check the restaurants, etc., and make the checks, but I just want to emphasise even more, from my point of view, it's the only check for the public that the places are safe to eat in. So very, very important and very high priority. I'm glad to see that you've got quite a high outturn on that, 89.4. And I wonder, it's data only, I wonder whether it could be thought of as important enough to warrant a target or not, but that would not be just my decision, obviously it would be a committee decision here. But I just wondered whether we thought that might be necessary, because it's the only check that the public have, really, when they go out to eat. And that's all, thanks very much. Oh, one other question. Have we any cases of monkeypox in Waverley that you're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Coburn.
Thank you. Mine relates to environmental health. I'm getting increasing complaints, and I'm sure others are too, and I know I've spoken to you, Richard, about them in the past. And it's all to do with basically what people are doing in their gardens these days that they used not to do. I mean, they light them up like the Queen Mary. You know, you've got lights, you've got certainly opposite me, I've got searchlights or spotlights on every tree there is. And then, of course, outbuildings and everything else. And you get noise attached to the light. Now, not only is this bad for the residents, but it's not great for wildlife either, especially in areas where we do pride ourselves in keeping it reasonably dark. So my question really is, Richard, when I speak to the environmental health team, they do a tremendous amount. I mean, they're incredibly helpful, and I can't fault them. But they put the onus very much on the resident that's being affected, you know, to get all the information. And then they say their hands are tied. You know, there is so little they can do in terms of legislation or guidance, actually, to put a stop to some of this behaviour. So I just wondered if there is anything we can do in sort of environmental health planning terms, anything that we can use just to try and encourage people to just turn the lights down a little earlier, and the same for the music.
Well, certainly, Councillor Coburn, in terms of music, if it is loud and regular loud music, we can use the powers under the Environmental Protection Act. The difficulty is, as you say, gathering the evidence. And if you look at the numbers of complaints that team's had, the number of issues they've had to deal with, there's only 4.5 full-time equivalents in that team. So that's 4 and a bit people to deal with all those complaints. So in an ideal world, you'd have a system where people were on call and on duty to go out of an evening and monitor and measure noise. But we don't have the luxury of a large team of people. So what we've done, and what a lot of other local authorities have done, is issued noise diaries to people to keep a record of the noise, and then use those noise diaries to assess how likely it is to be a nuisance, and then assess when it's likely to happen, so that they can then target visits at the times when the noise is most likely happening. So it is, I'm afraid, a protracted process compared with having a blue light response, but we don't have the numbers of staff and the resources to provide that blue light response to every noise complaint we get. So it is about balancing resources against the need, and trying to provide the most effective response we can to people's noise complaints, and indeed complaints about floodlighting and that sort of thing. Although the floodlighting one is easier to deal with theoretically, because you can always visit when the lights are on, almost, if they're on a regular basis. But there's certainly powers to deal with noise nuisance if it's regular and very loud. And certainly with lighting as well, we have intervened in a number of cases where we've asked people to either realign and turn the lighting down so it doesn't shine out so far, or in some cases even perhaps reduce the amount of lighting they've got. But you're absolutely right. The advent of COVID has seen lots of outbuildings in gardens, which of course Zach will tell you are permitted development. They don't need planning permission, so there are no real planning controls over them if they're under a certain size and of temporary nature. And a lot of people have in fact turned them into bars. And I'm sure you've come across that sort of thing. It's very popular that people have bars in their gardens now, and they are generating more noise complaints and more complaints about general antisocial behaviour in people's gardens, and we're having to deal with those as they crop up.
Councillor Dixon.
Yes, sorry, I'm going to take us a slightly different direction. I'm looking at the Memorial Hall in Farnham, where you've installed an air source heat pump and solar panels, which is great. I'll just ask a few questions. It's quite a large space inside Memorial Hall. Is this we put in underfloor heating, or is this a hybrid system where the hot water is pumped through existing radiators?
You've got me there. I'm not into that level of technical detail on the system there, I'm afraid. But
there's a couple of things here that is that I mean, one thing I would just say, okay, in general, is what we need to look at here is whether or not we're actually saving any money on the heating, because if they're put in a hybrid system, that means that when the temperature in the hall falls down below a certain level, then the heating goes back on. So they'll have an air hub, and that's often done because I was looking to put, I went and did some research this in my house, and basically they start saying, well, you either need brand new bigger radiators or you need underfloor heating. And if you just put an air source heat pump straight into your normal radiators, then you're going to see a dramatic reduction in the temperature in your house. So therefore, they then, as a get out of jail free clause, they put in a hybrid system. So it's still using the gas and you're using hot. It gets very complicated quite quickly. So what I'd like to know is whether what we need to know is whether or not we've made a record of what the bills were on Memorial Hill up until this point, and the temperature which is acceptable, because Memorial Hall is used by our elderly groups, isn't it, by the old age pensioners. So what temperature do they need the hall to be at, and the dance groups and all the rest of it? And how are we going to maintain that temperature next winter? And what's the cost of that going to be? And are we actually saving any money? And also the supplier, they should be experts in plumbing and heating. Have they given us any promises as to what the ambient temperature in normal oil is going to be? And if it's not delivered next winter, what's going to happen? Are we going to have to put electric heaters in there?
Right, what I don't want to do is get into a long discussion, because I think that's...
If I can, Chair,
Richard.
I'll ask for Teenie to contact you, Councillor Dixon, and talk to you in detail about it.
let's
Yeah.
take it outside of this
Yeah,
meeting.
it would be useful to know, thank you.
Um,
Because before they've finished in June, we need to put in place some guarantees going forward. So if next winter the new system doesn't deliver, we can go back to them and ask them to come back and fix it.
well, if you have that conversation, and if you feel it needs to come back to this meeting at the next one, please do. Councillor Marriott, you are next.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's a trivial question, really. Trying to make some sense of the responses to the action items. I couldn't understand what was being said. So, well, there's 2 pages here. In fact, it's not just in this section, it's other sections in the document as well. If you look at page 76. So this is the environmental.
Yeah, what I mean is, he was good. And Richard was going to go on to these next.
Okay, well, I can wait for later. This is a general question, though, Richard, on any of these action items. Because it appears many times in the document. On that particular item there, which is the second one up from the bottom, SP 2124 ES 16, you have an item there which is completed but off track. The original due date is the same as the completion date, so it's not off track. And then later on it says will be completed by June 2022. So I just wonder what we're trying to say in these items, and that's not really what's happened.
I think, Chair, the second 31st of March 22 should be 30th of June 22.
Yeah.
Because it's off track because we never completed it by the 31st of March, but we are going to complete it by the end of June.
Yeah.
So I think there's an error there with that second date, I'm afraid.
Yeah. I don't mind the comment. I guess that would be the case. It's a trivial error, but it appears many times in the document. The same type of approach. The original date is the same as the completion date, but the comment is there's still outstanding work to do. So I just wonder whether we could check all of those actually.
I'll take that back.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Wojciechowski.
Oh, thank you, Chairman. Just very quickly, Richard, I think your team in this department are having to do an enormous amount of extra work, and I absolutely agree with them because I don't know what's going on out there, but it just seems to be crazy. The 3 things that I would like to sort of look at, and maybe we could take this offline for the data, is bonfires and complaints, and how are we as a council dealing with that and trying to discourage it, because it does seem to be something that is on the increase. The other thing that alarms me as being an activist for animal rights is the number of dogs that were strays, and of course this is the COVID dog as well, and 30 of which were rehomed, and it'd be interesting to see the data on that in terms of, because it's legislation now says dogs should be microchipped, should they shouldn't be traced back. That seems like a large number. I think that's only going to increase, and I know as someone who runs a rescue, we're seeing it all the time at the moment, where we're just getting abandoned dogs left, right and centre. And the third thing was, with the 67% increase in reports of dead animals on the highway, what do we attribute this to? Is there any data to suggest such a massive increase? I know that's a needle in a haystack type question, but it does seem, are we collecting more data? Is it being reported more? Or is there just more random killing of animals when people driving home in the dark and not paying more attention? There were just 3 things that I would like to have in the data, and perhaps we could take that.
Okay, I'm happy to come back to you with some more data on that, and we can have a conversation about why perhaps there's more dead animals on the highway. I don't know the simple answer to that, but I'll certainly talk to the teams and see if there's any thoughts on why that may be. And certainly we can look at the dog statistics for you. I'll ask Jeanette Guy to contact you about that, talk you through the statistics on it, and indeed the bonfire complaints are also dealt with by her team. So I'll put Jeanette in touch with you and she can go through those in detail with you.
Perfect, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Richard, I've probably just got one comment, which was on page 73, which is the average number of days to remove. We've got the fly tips, we've got a couple of beds, but it's the one below, E2B, where although it's data only, both quarters, so quarter 2021, quarter 4 was 228. So a year later it's 244. So both quarter 4s are the highest months by far, which I can understand why it's at Christmas period and everything else. So my question is, knowing we've now got 2 years on the trot where we've had a 25% increase, are we going to do anything for the next quarter additionally? Because we must be able to plot where they're being dumped, and we know we've got a 20-30% increase in Q4.
Yeah. Okay, so between Q4 2021 and Q4 21-22, we've actually recruited 3 additional environmental enforcement officers. So there's now 4 environmental enforcement officers out there. We are investigating more of these fly tipping incidents in detail. We have a number now that are pending formal interviews under caution, with potential prosecutions or issuing of fixed penalty notices of up to £400. So we are taking action against the people we can identify for doing the fly tipping. We will publicise that widely, and hopefully that will act as a deterrent. And at the same time, we're also in the process of investigating wider use of CCTV cameras in known hotspots for fly tipping, so that we can try and catch some of these offenders red-handed.
Right, that's good. I just want to make sure we're doing something, and knowing the use of the CCTV, etc. as I do. I'm glad to hear that's being done. It was just that, there's a pattern, and therefore we should be concentrating on that quarter, which clearly we are starting to work towards. So I really look forward to seeing what the next Q4 was, to see how successful we are. Any other questions for Richard? Just one final from
Thank you for letting me come back, Chairman. I just spotted something that I missed earlier that I'd like to know about. E3 on page 73, monitoring on pause. Can I ask when monitoring is going to start again? Because certainly everywhere I go, the streets are littered with detritus and bits of stuff all over the place. When are we going to start monitoring that again?
As I said earlier, we did relax the street cleaning to keep the refuse collection and recycling performance up. We actually have a meeting this week with BIFA now to talk about remobilising the street cleaning and getting it back up to scratch. Once we've had that meeting and agreed an action plan to effect that, then we will start the monitoring again.
Just a quick comeback on that. Have we had a meeting with Farnham Town Council about the new street cleaning machine that they want to achieve a higher level of cleanliness?
We've had a number of meetings with Farnham Town Council. We've explored the possibility of that. Waverley has taken a decision that it's not going to fund that machine, but we're open to suggestions from Farnham Town Council as to whether they want to fund that machine. The advice we've had from some people is that it doesn't guarantee a higher standard of cleaning, and certainly with the trials, there were only a limited number of areas in Farnham where it would actually have been very effective. So we have investigated it. We've left it with Farnham Town Council to come back to us with any further proposals, and we'll certainly be open to that. We've also been asked by Farnham Town Council to look at whether they could take over the whole street cleaning operation in Farnham. That is a much bigger job than just having what's called a glutton running around the town centre. It includes all the mechanical sweeping, it includes all the litter bin emptying, etc., etc. So we are in discussion with them, but it's a much bigger task than I think they envisage if they wanted to take the whole of the street cleaning operation in Farnham over.
Okay, we'll leave that there. Thank you. Thank you very much, Richard, for your answers, and I know you're going to come back. There was one point that Councillor Else raised, which was the check on restaurants, whether that should be a target as it's the only method of checking. Louise, is there a set time we can do that, or can we do that at any time if we feel it's...
We have just gone through the review of that, but I don't know whether Richard has a view on whether that's a possibility to actually even have a target for that.
Well, logically, the target would be 100%, but we're never going to achieve that realistically. There are always premises that will fall below standard. I can go away and talk to my environmental health manager and ask what their experience is and whether other local authorities do set a target or whether they just monitor it as a percentage of level 3 and above.
Okay, if we leave that for you to come back, and if you want to talk to Councillor Else, what we don't want to set you a target, because I think 100% targets are always a silly target because you've only got to get one thing and the whole target's lost. It's got to be achievable, but it's got to be challenging as well. So I'll take one more question, then we must move on. Councillor Egan.
I was just going to say, I thought the purpose of targets was to monitor our performance, and we can't control the score on the door of the establishment. We can only record what we find. So, you know, if the community is got an increase of lower grade catering establishments, we can't actually influence that. We can only record the fact.
Well, we might be able to take action if they are breaching it. There could be either criminal offences or offences that we can deal with.
I appreciate that, but it's not a target that's monitoring Waverley's performance. It shouldn't come out in red because there's an issue.
No, because a lot of our targets, we are reliant on providers to do that target. If Richard could have a look at it, so what we don't want to do is set a target that clearly is unachievable and creates huge amounts of work. But if there is a target that allows us to see what's happening and monitor it, but take that away from the meeting rather than a discussion now.
If I have a choice between a 5-star and got 5 stars from Waverley or 2 stars, I'm going to go in a 5-star. So that's what I'm saying. It's a public service that we're providing. So it should have high priority, and I think therefore should have a target.
Okay, well,
that's my point.
Your case has been made, and I'll leave it for you and Richard to have a discussion afterwards. Brilliant. So we'll let Richard go. Who's going to?
Shall we go to Katie Webb next
Katie
on
Webb.
communities? On page 51 of the agenda.
Hi, Katie.
Hi.
You want to just talk through the issues first, and then I'll open it up afterwards.
Yeah, so really I'm here on mainly the communities aspect. If there's any other questions around private sector housing, I can take them back to Andrew. So yes, the end of year, I mean, it's been yet another really busy year for my team, and we are a small team. We consist of 3 officers full-time with all sort of individual areas of work. Through that time, we have delivered the Thriving Communities Commissioning Fund, a new funding scheme from last year. We have restructured our community safety team, and due to the high level of community triggers and antisocial behaviour we've been experiencing, we've now actually recruited a dedicated antisocial behaviour officer that's working across all services across the council and with our partners. We still have been supporting many of the groups that now set up the COVID. They've now sort of transitioning some of the work that they've been doing and focusing on our Ukraine guests and sponsors and guests from our family scheme. So we're working with those organisations around community support. We've also been delivering the Household Support Fund in the first tranche of that funding, which was the October through to the end of March. We disseminated across, working with our voluntary sector, town councils and citizens advice. We disseminated about 240, just under 240,000. There were some administrative costs as well. And we are now starting to work on the second tranche of funding, which is unfortunately, is a different pot. The allocation is different from the first tranche. We've also had, in the last year, we've had the internal safeguarding review, and we have had an action plan, and we've been delivering those actions on our internal safeguarding policies and processes. And also we have the development of the 3-year annual rolling partnership plan, which I know will come to community ONS later in the year. in relation to the other areas of housing, I think you obviously had the opportunity to read through them, but happy to take back those questions for Andrew if you have any others on that.
Okay, I'd like to answer questions, and I've got a few issues. Mark, you want to
just say resources ONS covered the housing indicators yesterday, so I think
thank you.
Okay,
excellent.
That's good.
Thank you, Chairman. So you're placing a focus on key priority areas with regard to the Safer Waverley partnership, Katie. Can you tell me how these areas are identified? And also your ASB officer, is he, she going to be visiting parish and town councils to find out what the deal is in all those places? Because I certainly think in my village that would be welcome, and it would demonstrate that Waverley take the towns and parishes very seriously and their issues, because I think sometimes in the villages that's not quite understood. And there was just one other question I had. The fund that you talked about, the household support fund. So you say the second tranche isn't good. The pot's not going to be quite the same. And you went to Farnham Town Council, Citizens Advice Waverley and Hazelmere Town Council, 3 counties money, and the council's community service and housing rents account. So why did you go to Farnham Town Council and not any of the other towns? I'm just interested to know why that happened. And where does that leave the villages? I'm interested to know that as well. I'm keen that the villages aren't forgotten in any way, so I'd like to hear about that.
Right, you might need to sort of remind me of sort of 3 questions on. I'll start with the Safer Waverley partnership. Now, the priorities in the rolling plan are really decided between the sort of priorities across Surrey that are emerging, and then we do our local part of the plan, which really will focus on our local elements. So that's been developed at the moment. Those priorities have changed over the last few years, particularly with the impact of COVID. So that's being developed at the moment, and I'm happy for Eve Budd, who's working on that, to give you a call, because we're at the sort of early parts of development, and that will come to you in Community ONS. And it's usually also the local work is done through the report, through the reporting of crime and incidents with the police, and through priorities that we're seeing, particularly in regards to violence against women, domestic abuse, if we're seeing an increase in modern day slavery. So all of those will help develop that plan. And those priorities tend to be Surrey wide, and then we tweak them to the local priorities that we're experiencing, that we're working on at the moment. In relation to the antisocial behaviour officer, it is a he, and Paul started 4 weeks ago. So he's working across all services corporately, and what we're trying to do is focus on getting a corporate response approach to how we as a council manage antisocial behaviour. So he's working with Richard's teams, environmental health, with our housing colleagues, with our planning colleagues, and so we're working on getting a corporate approach. And he's also working with our neighbourhood police teams to start understanding what the local problems are. He will lead with our joint action groups, the Safer Waverley Partnership. And when he's settled, he's sort of not out on the beat as an officer at the moment, because there's a lot of work around our community triggers and our actual sort of way we're managing and dealing with antisocial behaviour. But yes, I can sort of ask him to give you a call, and he will be out and about, and he will be getting to know more of the town councils and the parish councils as he goes along. He's really beginning to get an understanding of the issue. Sorry, now I have a barking dog. I just shut the door. Sorry about that. With the household support fund, what we tried to use, it was a considerable amount of money that we had for that first tranche. We got it at the end of October. So the time we got systems in place, we had to be able to spend that it was 243,000, and we had to spend certainly the majority of the first tranche by January, which was half of the fund, to be able to claim the second tranche till the end of March. So what we tried to do is use a variety of funds and support fund elements that were already out there to help us be able to spend that money. It actually meant that we had a really across the board, we managed to reach the whole of Waverley. We managed the pot that covered the Cranley and Godalming area and surrounding villages. The Hazelmere Town Council and Farnham, they had COVID funds groups set up, so they were able to administer a pot. And then we used Citizens Advice Waverley around things like the food vouchers. So it was disseminated in a number of ways. It could be food vouchers, fuel poverty. We were able to do some utilities. Did utilities. We were able to do some things like cookers, beds, fridges. So anything but that was only proportion of the fund. We do have some graphs and things which I could happily share with people just so you can see the spread across the whole of the borough. But we really did reach a lot of people. We sent letters out through our council tax to any resident who was on council tax benefit. We publicised it by the website. We did it through Facebook. We did a lot of media on it. It had quite an equal coverage across the whole of Waverley. So we were really pleased with how that tranche went. We received notice of the second tranche, which the government announced in March. In that, they slightly changed the terms. It was to very much be 1/3 of the funding had to be focused on residents of pensionable age, which was 64 and above. Our all the borough and districts allocations, actually the focus for the funding for the focus for the older, for the over 65s, the majority of that fund has come via borough and districts, which means we have a large allocation that we have to deliver and spend to our older population. And unfortunately, we have a smaller tranche this year, which is our general pot for under 65. So we are, we've yet to receive the money, but we are having to sort of now think how we will deliver that and get it to those older residents. So it is, we would have preferred to see the pot the way it was the first time, in the fact that, you know, it reached any age resident, whereas this one, it's been a little bit more prescriptive for us. But it's something we'll be raising with Surrey for when we get the third tranche, which will be in the end of September, beginning of October. We'd like to see it more towards back to how it was, where it was just one pot, general pot. And have I missed a question? I'm not sure. You have to remind me. Did I miss one, Councillor Els?
I don't think you have. I think you've come.
No, that was the three.
That was the three. Thank you.
What was the third?
No.
Oh, sorry. No, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Coburn.
No, I just really wanted to confirm that what Katie has said, that at the beginning of COVID, there were all sorts of different groups working, and we coordinated them all. So it says Farnham Town Council, but it's Farnham Town Council, the Maltings, Farnham Assist, and it goes out to the villages. We don't have a wall between the Bourne and Fretsham as far as we're concerned, you know, they get the same treatment. So, you know, when it says Farnham Town Council,
Yeah.
I promise you that nobody was ignored. It was just that we agreed to centre it. It was actually sort of centred on the Maltings, but run really by the Town Council. but everybody weighed in. I mean, if it weren't for all the organisations, you know, we'd never have got the fund. This was the COVID fund up and running, and that's what's moved seamlessly into this fund now. So, you know, it's much wider than just the town.
That's fine. I just, you know, we hear about these things, if I may, Chairman, we hear about these things from the top down, and I'm thinking of from the bottom up, and I'm thinking of somebody who doesn't have very much in my village, because that's where I live. How was that person reached? How was that person identified? How did you find out about that person? So
Yeah.
from the bottom up, I always look at everything from that perspective.
No, absolutely. And we used a variety of ways to get to anybody that we needed. But again, what we didn't want to do is what we have found is the first tranche was very much impacted around how you're impacted by COVID. So it also picked up families who normally never ever have benefits, aren't on benefits. But if they were self-employed, had been off work for 6 weeks and had no money for food, they were able to get access food vouchers or help costs towards their utilities. So it was a much more holistic approach. It was very good. We were really pleased with it. It's just slightly changed for this time, and we're having to work with Surrey on that.
Thank you. I've got a couple of points, and I'll come to Councillor Higgins in a second. Page 61 of the agenda, care line. I noticed this issue of numbers going down, but numbers every quarter have tumbled, yet the calls to care line are increasing. So I just think, again, we just need to look at how can we get more people onto care line, especially with all the information that we've got through COVID of the vulnerable and everybody else. Not asking for an answer, Kate. I just think wanted to raise it as an issue.
Yeah, that sits, the care line service sits with Kelvin, so I can follow that up with him for him to come back to you.
You were page 62 and 63, like the Vice Chair, I think the dates are all shot to pieces, but they also refer to, for example, the top of page 63, CS 11.1, and all I've got in my documents is CS 11.3. Next one refers to the same, and then, you know, it's just referring to something which we haven't got in our papers, and I can't see. So it's CS 11.1, but we haven't got 11.1 there. We've got 11.3, and the next one's exactly the same. It's just all the way through this, there are errors on either dates or references which actually don't form part of this.
On that one, because these are by exception, that will be, I take your point, that 11.1 is there, it's just not in your agenda because that one's presumably okay.
Well, it says it's been deferred due to pandemic and lack of staffing, so it's the exception that we're not doing something. I just think if we're referring to an action and we haven't got sight of it, so that was that. Now I've got something I've written on page 66, the partially completed. My notes are quite a lot there. I've put finances to be discussed at resources. So obviously in the commentary, it says that. Have they been discussed? Maybe that's something Mark can confirm.
So this is this 4.1?
Yes. So in there somewhere, I didn't underline it, but I've written finances we discussed at resources as this happened. So this is the Farnham Museum.
I'm just checking with the Vice Chair, but I don't have any memory of that. I can.
Okay, we just need to make sure that
Yeah.
the updates are accurate. If it hasn't been discussed, then we need to say it hasn't been discussed.
Yeah,
Can we just look for clarifying that one?
The state categorically, it wasn't discussed at resources.
Right.
No one's flagged it with this.
No.
And there's one other thing that's missing. It's Farnham Museum.
there's nothing in the Kelvin section, and then had a quick look. I can give you an update. This is really exciting, actually. So,
As long as it's a short update, because I'm very conscious it's 8 o'clock.
Confidentiality about update
Yeah.
as well.
oh, is that okay? Well,
So we'll miss the update.
okay, I missed the update, but just to say there should be something in here because, well, there's a couple of things going on, and they might be confidential, but
They are.
there's nothing.
Sorry, but they are.
Okay, but what about the moon plan?
Well, let's just move on from that because I don't want to, because we've got public watching, we don't want to get. But I think the update needs to be confirmed. It's an accurate update
Yeah.
because straight away I thought that doesn't seem right. But we'll move on from that. It's good to see he went from 50% on page 67 to 100% in Q3 to Q4. So that's a positive. Right, I think that's everything because we've got to move on. And I know Zach is getting really excited because he's keen to get on.
The page 82 of the agenda is.
Thank you very much, Katie.
Okay.
Yes, sure.
Okay, thank you.
Over to you, Zach, to talk through it and then we'll throw questions.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. And just to preempt it, as you were talking about the other ones, I've gone through the service plans, and it seems to be a pattern. There's a few sort of it needs to be really gone through with a fine tooth comb for the next one.
I have to say, for the first time, I've read a performance report and been confused and disappointed compared to normally, which is quite an easy document to read. I just didn't find it this time. So I think it's not just your, I think it's the whole report.
I think it's a general point that we'll pick up going forward with Louise. I mean, this is obviously an end of year reflection and an overall picture, but also the Q4 performance. But I hope you forgive me, but I'm very much going to focus on development management, so the determination of planning applications, because well publicised and members may recall that we did a session earlier in the year that I invited all members to around planning performance and issues of concern. And obviously that it won't come as too much of a surprise that, you know, we're still in the reds, well, for the end of last quarter. I'm pleased to say, I mean, there's reasons behind that, and the biggest thing you'll see, if you look at quarter, so I'm looking at page 84, if you look at the Q4 performance for 2021, we had a lot of green and a few ambers, and then it fell off a cliff. And there were various reasons for that, but not least of which being the rollout of our new system, which did have an impact on, a very big impact on validation times. And if the validation of applications in a timely manner is absolutely crucial to getting the applications to the officers so they have a chance of meeting the 8 and 13 week deadlines. And well publicised, it's not a surprise to you, but we were at a position this time last year where applications were taking, some applications were taking 12 to 15 weeks to validate. So they were getting to officers after they'd actually the actual expiry date. Now, obviously, we can seek extensions of time, but at the time, and we did on some, but we also took a conscious decision that wasn't really fair on the officers when applications were like that, to go back to agents and say, oh, by the way, I need an extension of time. Your application is going to be 20 weeks or so. It's a very regrettable situation, one we've been directly addressing. What I am pleased to see, even though there's still a huge amount of red on this in Q4, is that the trajectory is on an upward curve. And if you'll indulge me for a second, I wanted to sort of give you a further picture on how we're going into the next quarter in terms of a couple of these indicators. So the percentage of all applications dealt with within 26 weeks, and that's the government's planning guarantee. That's now got up to 92% for both April and May, so the first 2 months of this quarter. The processing of major applications has gone up from 55.6% 0.6% in Q4 to 100% in April and 100% in May. And for 153, which is the non-major applications, and members will be aware, you'll have seen in the press, and we've discussed it, the threat of designation on this indicator. So the test is over a 2-year period, whether you've sit down with 70% or more of non-major applications within 8 weeks. So you'll see that we were falling well behind in those 3 quarters, having done really well in Q4 of last year and Q1 of this year. But that's now, I'm pleased to say that for April we were 90% and for May we were 93%. Now I have to say a word of caution. It's an upward trajectory. We can't rest on our laurels. We still have a huge amount to go, and that might not be enough to meet the target, the rolling 2-year target. But it is moving very much moving in the right direction, and that will be the test when if we don't meet the target, what will happen is the government will write to us and say you haven't met the target. You will be given a couple of weeks minimum to explain the position, and we feel we've got a very strong narrative of where we've been and where we're going. Now, I did touch on validation. My target nominally that I set Sally when she joined us, and she's on the screen there, back in April last year, was that I want to get applications to officers within 5 working days as a minimum. And where we were, as I say, was 12 to 15 weeks. I'm pleased to say that as of today, there were no applications in backlog of over 5 days, and only about, I think it was about 10 applications awaiting validation. And that's partly due to the fact that although we had well-publicised issues with the computer system, the Horizon system is now actually working really effectively. We've got on top of it. We've invested. We've brought in a new data not processor, but a technical chap called Ryan, who is all over the system. And anytime there's issues with it, rather than having to go back to the developers, we have an in-house person who is completely au fait with the system and is dealing with that. Now, that's great news in terms of validations, and really pleased with that. But you'll appreciate that when we tackled the validations, what we did in November and December is we farmed out a lot of validation at one go to an external company called TerraQuest. They hit it hard. The idea was get the backlog right down, and then we can get to a point where we're in control. And that's what we've done. And I'm delighted that in the 6 months to date, 5.5 months to date, that Sally's team have really managed to meet that. Now, the problem is, because we hit it so hard in November, December, hundreds of applications flowed through the system all at once, and they go on to the officers, and that created a backlog there. The backlog is being slowly worked down, but obviously that does have ongoing impacts on performance. And if you tie that with the fact that we've got several very senior officers on maternity leave, we're not up to full establishment, and we have been reliant on agency staff, some of whom have been excellent, and we've kept on, some of whom I'm afraid the market is very much a seller's market at the moment for agency, because there are more councils wanting to employ people than there are good planners out there. We've been lucky with a few, not so lucky with others, but we're starting to hold our own, and certainly the feeling is that when morale is certainly improving, complaints are down, and we're moving in the right direction. But I'm certainly not complacent, and I'm developing a specific action plan. We had a planning improvement plan which I shared with members and all staff briefing some time ago, but we're actually having a specific action plan that I'm working on at the moment to specifically target the indicators that the government will be looking at us later this year. So for speed of applications, what they look at is a 2-year rolling period, and what they'll look from is October 2020 to September 2022, and then they'll take those councils that are under the threshold, they'll write to them. But just to reiterate that's just because you don't hit the target doesn't mean you're necessarily designated as a standards authority. You're given an opportunity to comment, and actually very few authorities have been designated. The last one before this year was around 2017, I want to say, and then this year Upplesford in Essex were designated for their poor performance on appeals on major applications. But interestingly, they weren't the worst performing, but they didn't have the give the confidence to the government that they were moving in the right direction. So what Sally and I are working on, and sorry to sort of labour the point, is working very closely with PAS, which is the National Planning Advisory Service. They've given us some free time. I think it's set out in the report. They've given us some free resource with we had a chap who was an ex-head of planning in Taunton Dean, somewhere I started my career, came down and sat round with us and has given us suggestions of how we address performance. And we're working with them around the action plan and the narrative. So that's kind of where we are in development management. I'm not going to sit here and say we're doing wonderfully. What I will say is we've been doing really badly. There were reasons for it dropping off a cliff. Performance is now steadily improving. I want to get us not just back where we were. I want to get us to a place where we're outperforming where we were previously. And I know we brought that new indicator in because we were reliant very much on extensions of time. I think regrettably extension of time are going to be with us for a little bit longer until we get the backlog sorted. But then I want to move to a position where that's very much the exception rather than the rule. And it's to start looking at you, Councillor House, because I know you were very passionate about that, and we brought in the indicators there. But allied to that, one thing, and I don't want to embarrass her, but one thing that Sally really brings is this focus on customer care. Now, it's not perfect. We still get complaints, and there's still our applications that people are unhappy about. But we're really pushing that, and we may need to push. It's not a nice thing, but we may have to deal with individual performance issues around communications. But by direct action with officers. As a general rule, we're really pushing forward with improving communications. It's not perfect, but we are certainly trying to get there. And one thing that Sally and I have been doing, just going back to this question about getting out to the parishes and towns, is Sally and I have set up regular meetings and are very happy to talk about further ones. So we have a Western Villages meeting every 4 months, and we had one last week. So we had 5 or 6 parishes. I can't remember if it's 5 or 6, I think. So including Elsted and Church and Tilford and Frensham, where we met with them, and it was all about listening and learning and explaining and trying to look at that. We have a quarterly meeting with Farnham Town Council, Farnham Society. Tomorrow we're at Whitley. We've met with Busbridge Council, Godalming Town Council, and what we're trying to do is, and we've now set up, we've had 2 agents forums, one in November, one in, I want to say May. And what we're trying to do is say, look, we're not perfect, but we're trying to learn, and we're turning the tanker rounds. And yeah, so I'm not going to sit here and make excuses, but I do want to provide the sort of the background and the context to that. Turning away from sort of development management for a moment, planning policy obviously focus on local plan part 2, and there's been a huge amount of work done on that. We've published the Dunsfold Park supplementary planning document, and we've developed the sustainability and climate change supplementary planning document, which will be going out to consultation June the 27th, I believe it is, next Monday. Obviously a big focus, again, something I did a board member briefing on around 5-year land supply, and we're really desperately trying to sort of engage and work with developers where we can to deliver the housing that is wanted, and to try and avoid too much in the way of sort of these unwarranted or unwanted attacks, particularly on our countryside on the Greenbelt. And obviously you're here, Councillor Denis and Councillor Coburn's there, and others from Farnham and those areas that are not greenbelt are really coming under fire. And there's still a lot of work to be done there. I think one of the crucial things, and I'm sure Councillor Coburn would agree, is to get local plan part 2 safely through its examination in public. That starts on the 12th of July, and with a fair wind. And there will need to be some major modifications that we'll need to consult on later in the summer. But with a fair wind, we hope to be in a position to adopt close-ish to Christmas now. Whether I think if I was a betting man, it'd be slightly after Christmas rather than slightly before. But that's the way we're going with local plan. And in economic development, their focus has been very much over that year in terms of COVID recovery, but and response to that, dishing out grants. But now we're looking forward, and it's very much focused on the economic development strategy, which will obviously come through overview and scrutiny in due course. We have commissioned a company to work on that, and there's a crack team working on that, and on taking forward the bids. Now, the intention was to do business improvement districts for the 4 main settlements. Hazelmere have decided that they're not keen on doing a business improvement district, so we'll focus on Cranley, Godalming, and Farnham to take those through. Sorry, there's so much in here, but I think the best thing is to open up to questions, if that's okay with you, Chairman.
Okay, yeah, no, I'm glad you didn't try to make excuses, because I saw so many reds and put so many marks on it. Oh my goodness. So probably I don't need to repeat, because I think you've raised most of them. Page 91 though, obviously complaint statistics failed 5 quarters in a row.
Yeah.
And I think the table below that we've only achieved 1 out of 5. So you've gone through all the ones which I had massive concerns about. What I couldn't understand, and again it just might be this document or to do with, which is page 88, the top. So it starts off complete review of local plan part 1. Review must be completed by February 2023. So we've got 2 dates in there, but then it says to be continued in 22-23, which makes it only continued. Then it says the council has to decide whether or not to review the local plan.
Yeah. Well,
so I was like, well, if we're doing it and continuing it, then it says we've got to decide what we're going to do. It's just, I think that needs to be clarified.
Yeah.
And then the one underneath, again, it's just, so prepare and adopt climate change, carbon reduction, etc., etc. So we've got dates in December. So we've got a date, a completed by date of December 21. It says 33% complete.
Yeah.
A couple of lines down, it says the executive approved the draft SPD to be published.
Yeah.
So we've got documents 33% correct or completed, but it's gone to the executive. And again, it's the whole way through, if I have to be honest, this document is just all over the shop. And this is why I think it's probably taken us more time tonight than we've probably spent in the last 2 years going through the performance. Sure. I won't labour the points. You've covered all the reds. I'll open it up and
just clarify those 2 points very quickly. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Just on the 33% completed, I agree. It needs clarification. What I'm really talking about there is 33% of the process. So the process is the document being published in draft, then the consultation, and then the final draft and adoption. So, but it's not a 33%. Prepared SPD, it's gone through you, but it's not clear. It's not clear. No, I accept that. And then in terms of completing the target in the initial box, which I couldn't change, was complete review of local plan part 1. Well, that was always wrong, I'm afraid, from a year ago, because we weren't required to complete a review. We're required to decide whether or not to review the local plan, and that's the target to do by February 23, but I can understand the confusion. I think, as I say, myself and my colleagues will discuss this.
Yeah, I think how the report is brilliant. But I'll open it up. I'm conscious of time though. Councillor Elsenning.
Thank you. So well done. I like to hear your enthusiasm, Zach, and I'm really looking forward to quarter 1, 22-23. Sounds good. Keep it up. Just to say quickly, yes, I think it is interesting to see the applications that are not including a time extension. And I also think it might be helpful to you, but maybe not. Non-material amendments also take some of those, some of these percentages down. So, you know, you could do yourself a favour and make it determined within 8 weeks where time extension has not been agreed, and also because your time extensions are sometimes not your fault.
Sometimes.
And I think we need to understand that if there's a non-material amendment.
Normally.
Yeah. Just one other thing, if I may, Chairman, 91, page 91, complaints. It's disappointing to see level 2 response rate down to 75%. Would like to know what's being done to remedy that. Why is that? What's the problem with getting back to people within 10 days when it's a level 2 complaint? What's the reason?
I mean, that shouldn't be 10 working days anyway. And I have corrected it before, but it wasn't updated. It's 15 days.
15 now.
15 days, 15 working days. Yeah. I mean, I think I would go back to the.
Who changed that one? Can I ask?
No, it's always been 15. It's just like incorrect in this report.
Always been 15.
Well, it has been since I've been at the council. Yeah. I think it comes back to that point about if you miss one, the percentage drops. So if you look at the actual numbers there were only 4. I'm not excusing it, but there were only 4 level 2 complaints in Q4. 3 of which were dealt with in time. The other one was missed by 1 day, unfortunately. So that brings us down to 75%, because where you've got small numbers, one impacts. Whereas if you look at Q3, I mean, I'm pleased to see that the total number of complaints has come down. So if you look at Q3, I had to deal with 19 in that quarter. Level 2 complaints. I mean, that's more than 1 a week, you know, and 18 of those were dealt with in time, which gives you that. It still doesn't get me to the 95%, but yeah, I mean, it's a shame when any of them go over target, I'm afraid. But I mean, you'll see again. I'm pleased to see level 1 responses. So level 2s are with me, and I work with a lady called Sue Petzold, who's our complaints officer, to get those out. And as I say, the vast majority do go out in time. I think if you look at last year, we missed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it was that was a lot of complaints in level 2. Level 1, we haven't been performing so well, but I was pleased to see the Q3 and Q4 improvements in level 1 complaints. And you know, if you look at Q1, if you wanted an example of where the impact of Horizon, the computer system, had a major impact, you look at the complaints in Q1, 21-22, 45 complaints, both level 1 and level 2. And if you look at Q4, we had 14, so a third. And that was
that doesn't answer my question. Why you only have why is it that you can't get back to people within 15 days? What is it that goes wrong? That was my question.
Well,
however many it is.
Well, no, in the vast majority of cases we can.
But yes, but why?
Well, I don't. Well,
so that you can't do it. If you've only got 4 complaints, why can't you get back to people within 15 days? Is that an unreasonable question?
It's not an unreasonable question, but I think you have to put it in context of my job and the demands on my job, and the amount of work I have to do in terms of taking forward local plan and development management. No one's perfect, and I hear what you say, but part of me thinks, well, no one's saying to me, well done for getting 18 out of 19 level 2 complaints dealt with in Q3. So this is one case, Jenny, Councillor Elf, sorry, that went out of time. I don't know the specifics. Maybe it was missed in terms of the logging of the target date. I don't know. I mean, we can find out which one it was, but
well, maybe if you find out that one.
But you know, I suppose my point is focusing in on one that was missed out of, 19, 30, 49, 53. it's a bit.
I think that's probably enough. It feels as if you're scrutinising me, actually, and it is the other way round. So let's finish it there. shall we?
We'll move on. I don't think we're going to get any further on that one.
Yeah, just one very quick question. I don't really understand, sorry, I probably should, but I don't. I don't understand the tilted balance thing. How long are we gonna have to live with the tilted balance? And should we be worried about the numbers on page 85 which show that the actual number of houses being built and completed is actually in the red as well?
I'm conscious that tilted balance is a presentation on its own.
Yeah, but how long are we going to live with this tilted balance?
Well, it could be for quite a long while.
Until we get the 5 years.
Until we get 5 years. Yeah.
So it could be.
Till December.
Oh God, no! I think we're probably looking at years.
A 5-year housing plan.
Until it goes, yeah.
It could be years before we get.
Probably not
to
until Dunsfold starts.
Oh, right.
And even then,
That's a debate to be had.
Yeah.
Planning inspector.
So I think we're years away.
Have we got a fighting fund for the appeals are going to have to run?
Well, that's another question. I don't want to divert. Any questions about the performance? If not, I'll move on because I'm conscious. We have one final question. Councillor Hegan.
I just wanted to know where we stand on pre-application advice. It's showing us data not available.
Yeah.
Have we restarted that service?
It restarts on July the 1st, Councillor Hegan. Yes, the new system with the new tiered system. So based on the level of, so rather than having a standard 21-day response time for pre-apps, which was never realistic for sort of, comparing a conservatory on a house pre-app to a 1,000 homes pre-app, it will be much more fit for purpose, and our fees have been adjusted accordingly, which you'll have seen in the budget that you approved, that's full council and you scrutinised earlier this year. Yeah.
Okay, and I will allow my advice just to ask the final question before we go on to.
Thank you, Chair. No, it's just looking at the performance data. And just a quick question really on this. The shortfalls, you mentioned that you essentially to staffing shortfalls. Yeah. So the fact you can't meet the targets is because
not entirely. I think you have to come as set out in here. So the increase, the spike in applications that came in COVID. So 30 to 40% spike in applications. And if you tie that in with the delays that were inherent in the system and the backlogs, that is affecting that. Yeah.
But what I'm going to do with this, isn't it possible to perhaps have a projection going forward from this point? So rather than having whatever these numbers, all the red boxes, you might be able to say by the end of quarter so and so that should now go green.
We could do, but obviously that would be a change in the way we report the performance report. But I suppose I'm looking through you, Chairman. I'm looking towards.
What I think you could do is in your commentary, refer to where you think. I don't think you could. We want to start adding boxes of projections, but I think in the commentary, especially with so many reds, I think we could say in relation to timeliness, this is the trajectory that we're going. But I think we've got to keep it out of the actual data because it's not data that we can rely on. But maybe you could add a couple of lines in the commentary, just saying where the trajectory is going.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would answer the question if people say why. But, so you covered that.
Absolutely, and I tried to do it with the April and May figures here, but obviously they weren't. There wasn't anywhere to put them into the report, but as you say in the commentary, that could be a good place. So thank you. Yeah, good
discussion. We'll move on. Thank you for your honesty and the fact you haven't tried to bluff your way through it, because that would have caused a problem if you'd have done that. We would. Policy is the best policy when its performance hasn't been that good. Well, I'm going to move swiftly on. But I think my final comment on it, I'm a bit disappointed in the way we've had to spend so much time because the report really hasn't done what it's supposed to do. And that's not a criticism against one person, it's the whole thing's not quite right. Okay, so let's move on to item 8, the Biodiversity Action Plan, which is pages 93 to 184. And I think we've got Matt Lang and David Oliver to present.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll just give you my introduction. The biodiversity policy supports the Council's commitment to the stated climate emergency and its aims to become net zero carbon by 2030. the biodiversity policy importantly promotes a consistent and comprehensive approach to the council's management of habitats and wildlife in order that biodiversity is enhanced and increased wherever possible in the borough. Embedding legislation such as the New Environment Act 2021 and ensuring the council is in a position to fully implement the new legislation as it develops and ensure that our council leads from the front whilst influencing others to improve environments for all our residents and future generations. As highlighted in the agenda report, there will be a need for additional resources, including the proposed recruitment of a biodiversity officer. The policy, as you see it, is in its 14th version and has undergone several stages of town, parish and wildlife environmental interest group consultation and revision. And I thank the Surrey Wildlife Trust who work closely with the council's officers in the creation of this policy. Pending any amendments and feedback, it is our hope that this committee will recommend that the biodiversity policy is considered for adoption by the council at the next available executive meeting. And Chairman, I'm happy to try and answer any questions that anyone may have on this.
Before I go to the committee, I've got two speakers. I've got Councillor Seaborn, who's had to sit through a long, arduous meeting so far, and Councillor Hyman. So I'll go to you two first. So Councillor Seaborn, if you want to go first. And
yeah, okay. Thank you, Chairman. I have to say I found the document an interesting read, and I think I agree with the policy content. So I'll restrict my few comments on the policy to style rather than substance. I've got rather more to say about the plan when we get to it. So, first, I was a bit disappointed that this has apparently been through proofreading and grammar and spell checks, because there's a liberal scattering of punctuation and capitalisation errors through much of the document. Certainly needs another good check before it gets to executive and council. Also, the paragraph numbering goes completely awry as early as section 4. There are two section 4s in this, so everything after the second section 4 is one section out. Fortunately, that's all trivial and easily corrected. So moving on to something of slightly more moment. The aspect that does detract from the utility of the document is that you have to wade through about an hour of background reading and guidance before you actually get to the new policy. This could be made more palatable, in my view, by just adding a very brief introduction immediately after the foreword. An introduction could then describe the content and inform the readers that the document contains 14 policy statements with supporting text starting at section 10. That's section 10 after it's been renumbered. That would spare the reader the suspense of wondering if the policy is ever actually going to appear, because I was certainly sitting reading for a long time before I actually found it in the new policy. So it's a small thing, it's easily done, but I think it would help the reader rather than leaving them in suspense. So if I can move on to the plan part of it, I believe that both scrutiny committees and the executive have failed to push officers adequately on plans such as this in order to turn useful lists into good plans. And it wouldn't take very much additional work to provide a significant increase in the utility of plan with regards to estimating the financial and human resource requirements needed to implement it. Firstly, I think members should be asking, what are the financial and human resources implications of implementing this or any other plan? It should be straightforward to create an indicative spend profile. In fact, it's so straightforward that I actually did it on Friday morning while I was waiting for a taxi to take me to the station in about 45 minutes. It's obviously nowhere near as good as an officer would produce, because I don't actually know the detail behind the costings. But if you just take an average of the midpoint costing from each of the plan items, you end up with a 10-year spend of around £3.7 million, which is a far more interesting number than no number at all, which is what we have at the moment. And you have annual spends of somewhere between 340 and 415,000. And I don't know whether those are right or not, but it wouldn't take officers very long to turn those quick and dirty estimates into numbers that members could
could digest and say, yeah, we're approving a plan and it's going to cost the council somewhere between 10 and 5 million pounds over the 10-year period. It's got to be far more useful than approving a plan and just guessing what it's going to cost. There's only one big uncertainty item in the plan, and that's the only high spend activity, which is the very first item. But that could actually have very significant impact on the spend profile. So it would be interesting to know what that first item is in terms of cost, which is just the maintenance of the biodiversity areas that we already have, because the threshold for that I think is 50,000. This could be 500,000, could be 50,000, could be anything. So knowing that it's a high ticket item doesn't tell us very much. So it'd be helpful to know that. And then armed with a profile, it should be possible to advise members how much of that's going to be funded internally and how much requires grants. Because we've got to go out and find the money that we don't have internally. But again, it'd be really useful to know how much we've got to find and how much lobbying we're going to have to do to get hold of it outside of class. So that's the cash aspect. Secondly, it'd be interesting to know how much of this plan utilises existing staff and how much requires new staff, short-term contractors, or specialist consultants for specialist projects. And again, it would be very easy to create columns for each category in the plan and itemise the full-time equivalent requirements in each category for each line item so that we have a staffing requirement estimate. So David's told us we're going to be looking to hire one new officer, but going down that route, I think very quickly we'd arrive at a clear indication of how well we're staffed to deliver what we've got to deliver. And then finally, I think it'd be really helpful to give each line item a priority. We know funding's not certain, so it's going to be helpful to know what might have to be sacrificed if sufficient funds can't be secured. And again, I think that's probably quite easily done. None of this has to be exact. None of it requires that much work as far as I can see. But if the council or the executive is to be asked to approve a plan, then I think the indicative total costings and spend profiles would help enormously to enable people to support the plan, instead of just the broad categorisation that we have into low, medium or high for each line item. So I don't want to say more than that. I think it's a really good piece of work. But like so many of the good pieces of work that we've done over the last 2 years, without too much extra effort, I think it could be even better. So thanks for allowing me the opportunity to speak to the committee. Thanks, Jane.
And I think I've managed to record all those issues. Councillor Hyman.
Good evening, Chairman. Thank you. Yes, thanks very much indeed to Councillor Seaborne for his extremely diplomatic and deep scrutiny that has saved me covering, which is really good. There is a lot of work gone into this, but there is more work to do, as Councillor Seaborne has said. For instance, if I could refer you to page 166. And I'm using officer report numbers rather than the individual reports. Page 166 has got Farnham Park on there. There's nothing in there about key species, yet it is noted for its great crested newts. And, there are certainly things that need to be added in to other areas. I've just picked one example. I think we are quite a long way short of having the full shebang as yet, as I think Councillor Seaborne would agree. On page 158, the legislative context is very thin, and some would say that we should, in the position that we've in and how we've been treating biodiversity for the past 15 years, we should be a little bit clearer there. And on the last page of the report, where it covers conservation, favourable condition targets, because we must bear in mind that we've got responsibility for the SBA, for the Weldon Heath Phase 1 SBA here, at Frensham and Thursley and Hankley Common. When are we going to get those favourable conservation targets? Because a plan and with targets, whether we have to obviously it cascades down from national targets. The government gave Natural England money last May, I think it was, to do it, because Natural England were complaining that their funds had been cut. the government granted them an extra 100,000 or two, I think, or million or two, or whatever it was, or 200 million or something, to get these figures together, and we've seen nothing. And it's a meaningless plan without any targets or any aims to it. Where Councillor Seaborn's saying that we need to know the costs, I actually go back a little bit further. It's like take a step back from that, because I want to know what we're doing differently. I'm sure if I asked certain officers at Waverley and certain councillors, they would tell us that, oh, we're already doing everything for biodiversity. Well, obviously, I know we've been evading appropriate assessments for years, and nobody will admit it. But, you know, we do need to do things differently. What are we going to be doing differently? And from this biodiversity net gain, as far as I'm concerned, that's just a way of developers being allowed to cause environmental harm, and we can't be sure that the mitigation or compensation is going to be effective. We get something better than nothing, perhaps, but actually it's not good enough, is it, allowing the development that we know is going to be harmful to go ahead without having a guarantee that that things are going to be better overall, which is the idea, but it's certainly never happened yet, and I don't think many people trust it when they look at what's been going on with on habitats for the past 15 years. So apart from that, it's education, it looks like to me. I think it's section 11 and section 9. To section 12 said educate residents about biodiversity. That's interesting, because we've already got education in part of our borough on the Thames Basin Heath Spa, just at Heath End, on the top of those lovely maps that have been provided in the annex. So we've got education in part of Waverley. Are we going to put education in on the Weldon Heath Spa? That I assume we are. That's going to contradict it, because on the Thames Basin Heath, they've agreed not to tell residents the true purpose of their mitigation and wardening and education. Are we going to actually tell them the truth? So where we see that. I think it's down in section 11. The actual plan is that we're going to inform and educate residents. Are we going to tell them the truth, or are we going to take the approaches that we've been doing for the past 15 years? We're going to run two approaches for the different spas at the same time. So there is a lot of thinking needs to be done about this. I'll wrap up with 3 quick questions. There's a lot more, obviously, I could say on this, and but it's not just about habitats. It goes a lot deeper, because everything cascades from that. There's a meeting tomorrow of the Thames Basin Heath Joint Strategic Partnership Board. If we want to know whether education works, we should be asking them, because they've been trying it for 15 years, and to my mind have never provided any evidence that it's effective. So if we'd ask Councillor Darcy, who's going to be there on our behalf tomorrow, to ask Natural England when they give their presentation, when they expect to be able to provide objective evidence of the effectiveness of the SAM strategy. And if we've still got the leader my second question would be, if we've still got the leader there on the call, can he explain why he won't insist that officers meet the legal requirement to produce a detailed assessment of the effectiveness of Farnham Park, as it's having been designated as a SANG? I think that'll do for now, actually. But we do need to know how effective is this education going to be. How much of it we're doing at the moment, and certainly how effective is the SAM strategy. And Councillor Darcy, I hope, will ask that for us tomorrow if the committee would agree to ask him. But thank you for your time.
Okay, thank
there's
you
more work to do on this, and I think most people would agree if they've read through it, as Councillor Seaborn has very diplomatically pointed out. So I do hope that we're not going to see this in its present form at the July Council. Thanks.
Okay, so I think I've recorded most of what you said. So I'll open it up. Councillor Coburn.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, my problem with this really, I suppose it follows on from what other people said. Very, very easy read, very, very interesting. I don't feel that I have enough data here to know how this is going to work. We don't seem to have, following on from Councillor Hyman's point, any analysis of what we've actually got. I mean, we know what we're doing in these green spaces, but when we did the Farnham Biodiversity Action Plan, the first thing we did was work out what we actually had on the ground now, where we had the crested newts, where we had the slow worm, and then we had something to see when we were trying to achieve again in biodiversity. There's something to say, well, yes, we have, double the numbers or whatever. A bit like Councillor Hyman was asking for the bird numbers on the spa. So whether that's a future piece of work, it seems to be a little bit backwards, but I think I would have started as the Farnham Biodiversity Plan did, with trying to establish what you've got, then work out how you're going to improve that,
Never measure it.
And certainly if we're going to have to do the biodiversity net gain as part of planning, as if the levelling up bill goes through, it's going to become part of a planning condition. You think we need to go and have to measure things, otherwise
we won't be able to say whether the improvements.
Pointless.
The front end of the policy is just that. I would say there is a front loading of surveying and monitoring to find out exactly what we do have across all of our sites. That is one of the key initial objectives of the policy.
So it will be done. It's just not been done yet.
We've got over sort of 200 sites, so we don't have that information, and certainly not a level of information. So the policy sets out to initially get a baseline of survey data for all of our key sites, and then working down through the priority order so that we can truly say what we do have and use that as a baseline for future works, future monitoring, and also when B&G comes along, presumably down the line.
Yeah. Oh, okay. What's the other one I was going to say? I've forgotten now. Oh, that's right. No, can I just say it was the collaboration. You have an aspiration to work with the other plans, and I just wondered how you're actually going to achieve that. To me, it was the little detail that was missing. Loved it as a read. Perfectly behind all the attempts to what you're trying to achieve, but it's just the little detail. We have got a biodiversity action plan in Farnham. It was done with all the key stakeholders that you've been using here in Waverley, and it seems such a waste not to get the two, melded together and that sort of thing. So it's one thing to say cooperation, talk to people, but another thing actually to work out a process to do it, isn't it?
I completely agree, and that's one of the fundamentals of when we say we'll potentially recruit a biodiversity officer, because it's a very large piece of work, and it's certainly very time consuming to do right and correctly and to cover it. So that officer's role would in part be ensuring that we work with all our partners, stakeholders collaboratively, and use all the best bits of the collective plans and policies across the piece.
Yeah.
As well as working internally to ensure that we've got good links with our planning teams and all the other teams in delivering our objectives.
I've got Councillor Ells, Councillor Dixon, and then my Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, it was a good read. I enjoyed reading it. But what I would like to bring attention to is the fact that on 535, page 124, amenity spaces, it says most of the population live in the main urban settlements. Now that's true. But what about the villages? Don't forget the villages. We do seem to forget them. And it does strike me that 2/3 of our population live in the main urban settlements, but a third, and that's over 40,000 people, live in the villages. And so do not alienate the villages, because, and this is a very good thing to remember, on page 142, you want volunteers. That's where you're going to get your volunteers from in the villages, on your commons and your heaths and wherever else. You're going to get your volunteers from those people. So don't alienate them. If I may just go on, the villages are keen to preserve and enhance their areas. I can tell you that for nothing. So nothing to say, nothing against the towns, they are too, but it's the villages. So let's ensure we actively follow the policy statement to cultivate positive partnerships across the borough. Let's do that really seriously and sensibly. Broadwater Park on page 170 is mentioned, and it says current leases and partnerships, Broadwater leased to Broadwater Golf Course. Well, of course, we all know that's not the case, so that needs correcting on page 170. That's just a small comment. So on your list of, what are you calling them, partners, You've got things like Surrey Amphibian Reptile Group and National Trust and Natural England. You don't have HUG. HUG is Hankley Users Group. Hankley covers, I think, 1,400 acres of Waverley, and it's SSSI, and it's got all kinds of protected species there. HUG allows communication for the man on the street, if you like, with the MOD. Horse riders, cyclists, walkers, they all can represent themselves to the MOD through HUG. Hankley Users Group is a group I set up some years ago in order to improve communication with the MOD. So I don't see the MOD mentioned anywhere here. Should they be? Should they be a partner? Should you consider them a partner? I think that's about it, Chairman. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Very good document. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Sorry, you're all very small on my screen, but I know you're there. As a village boy, born and bred, I can assure you I'm not ignoring any villages, and we will do our best to reflect that in the policy.
Thank you.
Excellent. Councillor Dixon, I think
Yes,
you had your hand up,
just a couple
Councillor
of
Darcy.
things. Yes, on page 166, as mentioned of the Shepherd and Flock roundabout. It's not my special subject, but I do know that Councillor Martin was talking about last year of this very large roundabout becoming a nature reserve. So there is a lot of woodland there and a lot of rare trees. So I think there needs to be a longer listing for that roundabout. Hale reads on page 167. It says the grass and ancient semi-natural mixed woodland, and it conveniently forgets to mention that we just planted about 300 trees on there. And so I don't know whether or not this is the same for the other sites where you planted trees this year, but I did mention that obviously, you know, we haven't mentioned the fact that we just planted some new trees there, and why we planted them, whether or not there's a biodiversity benefit. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Darcy.
Yeah, thank you. It's a very interesting document. The question I have really arises from the Environment Act, which was passed last year, and that's going to impose a requirement for local authorities to produce a biodiversity report. I think it's every 5 years. And the first one's got to be produced within 3 years of this statute coming into effect, which I'm guessing will be when the NERC Act is amended to reflect the changes that were introduced by the Environment Act. And that, I think, is supposed to be happening in the next year or so. Now, this requirement will mean a lot of work, and as yet they haven't published exactly what they expect this biodiversity report to contain, but my guess is it's going to be quite a lot of what we've been talking about, which is baseline assessment of where we are. So I think that's going to drive an awful lot of this, because we're not going to have a choice. This is going to be a statutory requirement. So I think that needs to be taken on board, and perhaps it needs to be mentioned in the document that, in effect, we're going to be required to produce a lot of information by the government. So then I was going to ask you about, when you have this Appendix 2, you have key species, but I just wondered how to find what a key species was. And is it not the case that in this, it just happens to be the species that have been identified for that particular site as some interest? And therefore, it doesn't really mean a lot when you say key species.
In part, a lot of the front loading of the policy is to improve the surveying and then the monitoring of those species. So there certainly will be species invariably across our sites that we are unaware of, or that haven't been recorded for some time. We also know that records are woefully inadequate when kept centrally, nationally, and even on county basis. We've discovered several rare, thought to be almost extinct species at Frensham just in the last 6 months, which aren't on any records or databases for Surrey, yet alone other counties. So there will certainly be holes in our knowledge of species. And some of the key species are things like our reptile populations, which are observed to be key species, and obviously working closely with Natural England for breeding bird assemblages on Frensham Common and other sites. So some are set out as key species, but yes, I totally agree with you. There will be what could potentially be key species on sites that we are unaware of their presence, and that is part of the policy to actively survey and investigate what they are and where they are and how they can best be conserved and promoted.
Right, I'm going to bring this item to because I've got to try and summarise some of these issues that we've raised. I don't know if Mark's recorded what I had, but so we had about having a summary, checking the grammar, etc. Needs to be done again. Financial and resources implications, detailed. Indicative spend profile. Maintenance costs for our biodiversity areas. What we expected to finance from either internal or external via grants, etc. So we can look at the workloads on that. Staffing requirements. So what's going to be existing staff, new staff, specialist staff, consultants, etc. So that prioritisation if funding not achieved. We've just talked about the statutory requirement to produce a report every 5 years. So we need to raise that as a concern and how that's going to work. Councillor Hyman raised about the section on the legislation. So let's just make sure we're happy we got it spot on and its context. Talked about favourable conservation targets, lack of targets, and the question, what are we actually doing differently compared to what we're doing now? I think he raised about the education and how that was going to be done. And I think he asked Martin to raise, was it the span or whatever it was. So there's that.
I understood what he wanted.
Yeah, good. I'm glad you do.
To ask Councillor Darcy to ask Natural England when they expect to be able to provide the objective evidence of the effectiveness of their strategy. I mean, because we're pretty much going to be copying it with education by the sound of it in respect of all other biodiversity as well.
That's exactly what I was going to say, Joe.
I know you were. I
just nodded his head.
And if the leader's there and can answer why he
I think he must have got bored with us because he's gone.
Run away.
It was raised about the lack of mention and importance to rural areas, stroke villages. If I've missed anything, that was quite a lot. I think we.
I did have my hand up earlier on.
Oh, I can. Peripheral view. See, I'm looking in front.
It's probably it's not a small point in my mind. I do have a problem with the road verges section.
Okay, which is
page 125. To me, this just smacks of saying we're doing something about biodiversity by not mowing the verges, not maintaining them. And I come back to Carol's point, really, that where we're starting from, you need the data to start with to say we've made progress in any of these areas. What is the justification for saying the road verge is going to be a diverse habitat? I don't see it.
Okay, that's a very good point.
And I think also, and obviously most of us are driving around, I think there are areas on the road which are now dangerous because of the height of the verges. That worries me more than anything else, actually.
Absolutely. So, Mark, if you can record that one. So, I think, David, I think we all thought it was a good report, but it has the potential to be something outstanding. And I think there's some really good points have been raised to do that. Do you want to say something?
Yes, MOD. I think it's very important that we work with the MOD because of these.
So there were some partners that were mentioned.
Yes.
You mentioned the hub, and so it's just MOD. So we just need to update on some of the partnership and those.
And also
issues.
the fact that the Bullwater Golf course club or whatever you call it is got a lease, and it hasn't, and it's in this document. It should be.
There was a few inaccuracies, so I think Sally raised something as well, and so I think those partnership ones,
We now need to get them out.
Yeah. So I suppose it is to check the section on I don't know what section number that was.
I've made a list of lots of page numbers as have been reported.
Okay, but we need to just go through that list, make sure it's accurate, because I think it was pages 160 something.
And I think it might be missing a woodland and heath end. There's a little nature reserve, but it might be an older shot. I'm not sure.
Well, can I ask, because I think that's quite a lot we've given David to chew over. If there's other bits that we haven't had time to debate, if you can forward them on to Mark and David, but copy Mark in, and we can add some other bits. Okay, thank you for that. It was a good bit of work, and our criticism is only because we want it to be an outstanding piece of work.
Absolutely fine, Chairman. Thank you and the committee for all your time this evening. I mean, I'll just leave you with a comment that the policy, whenever it is hopefully adopted, will always be a living document, because the Environment Act 2021 still hasn't actually specified enough detail what it actually requires and how we're going to deliver on that. So there's always going to be quite a lot of work going into this. Thank you all for your time tonight.
Councillor Coburn, did you want to say something?
Yes, we're just going to say in relation to Sally's point, you've got the 3 appendices, and I think individual councillors should look at them in great detail and make sure that there's nothing missing, because they came a little bit late and they were quite small. But given time, then I think we can make sure that no little green space does get missed in our own ward.
So can I ask everyone to do a week turnaround, to go through those, and if it's half a week, then we take it that you're happy with them. Okay, so apologies again, it is 9 o'clock, but I said we've had some long debates and some difficult conversations here tonight. So moving on swiftly. So we've got service plans 2023 to 26. These are going to be very brief.
Very brief.
Very brief.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman. So service plans came to this committee in January, and the feeling was that you didn't get enough chance to scrutinise them effectively because of the time. And the recommendation or the resolution from that committee date was that you wanted to set up some small working groups to look at each service plan in isolation. If I may, I just want, Chairman, to get a bit of clarification. The service plan timetable is that heads of service will start reviewing the 3-year rolling programmes at the end of August, September, and it will go along with the budget process. Did you want the working groups to look at the existing plans? Because the only issue about looking forward and to sit down with the heads of service for their next review of the service plans is that the senior management team will be formed as of the 1st of October and may well involve some changes, and you may sit down with people who then are no longer there later on in the year. So it's whether you want to look at your current service plans, or there's a bit more of a challenge looking forward.
Well, we should be always looking forward rather than looking back. But to be honest, I'm not really sure what looking forward looks like in our future, if I'm really honest. But I don't, I take views of my colleagues here. I don't see looking back is not, we're scrutinising the way we go forward and how we can improve performance and our facilities and how we treat the public, etc. So it's got to be looking forward. And looking forward, we don't really know what that looks like at the moment or who it's going to be.
All I would suggest, Jack, is if you wanted to do this, we could delay the setting up of the working groups until after September, and then we would know a bit better.
I think it's what's the point of a load of work now in September? Yeah. We could have a load of Guildford people who know nothing about our area, and we're going to be
teaching them.
So is everybody happy that we delay that decision? And
every ball's up in the air. We haven't a clue whether.
I haven't got a clue. I have no idea.
I don't even know how many balls we're juggling with.
We don't know.
I have no idea what our role is going to be. So let's move on now. Zach's had to disappear, and I think a very able assistant is going to read some notes out.
So apologies, Zach had to disappear before this item. All he would ask me to say was that the full draft plan for the local planning enforcement plan will be coming absolutely in September. He's been working very closely with the portfolio holder on this, and he absolutely will get this to you in September.
We'll wait and see. Okay, any comments? Please don't hide.
Wouldn't dare.
Okay, I think the message back is we wait in anticipation and we will give it our normal level of scrutiny that you would expect.
Oh, Chairman, I feel I must say, I had an issue in my ward where I introduced the residents to the enforcement team where they were just about to serve notice. They had a very good conversation. As a direct result, the matter was resolved. So I've got to speak up for the enforcement team a little bit just to say there are some things, but it's about being a local ward member, knowing what's going on and knowing that sometimes you don't have to escalate things. You can bring people around the table, which is exactly what we've done and got very good at.
I absolutely agree, but I think some of the enforcement officers are so overwhelmed with the amount of work. And I know my area for Lydia Park and all around there, they have got so many enforcement cases. It's difficult to keep up which one relates to which bit of field, and and they're absolutely bogged down. But I do agree, and often, they will sort stuff out. And I think
following your point there, Chairman, which is exactly right. They were going down a road that with additional information helped them resolve it, but they didn't know.
Yeah.
So it was a simple meeting of getting around the table to discuss it, which resolved the issue, and everyone was much clearer on what was going on.
Local is always best.
Can I just add to that? Because I did the same thing. I brought a resident over to speak to the team here, and the whole thing was resolved in the afternoon. And we seem to have lost that habit of actually just meeting, picking up the phone, because everything ends up being a complaint. So the residents don't want it to be a complaint. They just want an answer to their question, and it carries on. So, I do back Councillor Poraszewski to the hilt on that one, and everybody else has mentioned it. We have just some simple measures in the enforcement plan that just means contact is made and made quickly, because there's nothing.
Try to do an early resolution.
Yeah.
No, absolutely agree. So if you could feed that one back. No, I have got Councillor Hyman who was going to speak on that one. Councillor Hyman is still here.
Everybody seems to have gone except us. It's only us.
I'm here. Sorry, I thought we were.
Thank you. I was beginning to get a complex.
No, not at all. It's I was just I was wondering if we were going to. I thought we were going to get a presentation on the.
I thought she's had to go, but I think if the plan's coming, I think we might as well actually scrutinise the plan rather than just a presentation.
Right. Okay. I'm just thinking that as far as enforcement plan is concerned, I mean, do we know what stage we're at with getting it into print, something in front of us?
Well, we get it in September, so it's going to be prior to that.
I heard you say something about that. I do apologise. It wasn't particularly clear. That was my fault. It's sure it's my cloth ears. Yes, I mean, my only comment really was that I think we need to be consistent. We need to be absolutely consistent because residents expect us to be fair and very tough, and that we've got to lead by example. That we can't have a situation where there's one rule for us and our own and partners' developments and another rule for residents. And I will give you the example of East Street, obviously the Brightwells development, and just ask whether we're going to get the regularization of East Street's planning issues, because we are awaiting planning applications, as the portfolio holder has confirmed and agrees, and changes to the Section 106 agreement. There's flood compensation for having raised land in the flood zone, which hasn't yet gone before any planning committee. And major changes to the traffic and air quality mitigation, which isn't being provided because it was never practical. We've got them to accept that, but we do need Faulkner Court Gardens. It looks like there's some garden grabbing going to be going on there, nicking more of their gardens, and this all has to go through planning. Really, we need our residents to support us and know that if we're putting through an enforcement plan, that actually we're doing the same and leading by example. So.
I don't disagree with anything you've said about leading by example. What I don't want us to do is to go into specific enforcement cases, because that's not our role. Our role is to look at the policy, what I would suggest is when that policy comes out, and if you look at those conditions and you see issues, I think then you should raise, you know, in a formal way with Zach, with the case officer. I don't think, because I can think of a dozen cases where I could raise issues about enforcement, you know, and that's, you know, this isn't the place to actually do individual cases.
You're absolutely right. Absolutely, I agree. But the point is that if we're producing this, and whilst we're producing it, we're doing the opposite. That's not acceptable.
No,
and it's not going to be acceptable to our residents. You know,
and what you need to do then is you need to raise that with Zach formally to say that actually that behaviour is not acceptable. And you can highlight when we come back to discuss it in September where there are issues in the policy that aren't strong enough or are ambiguous or whatever. Absolutely, because that is our role to scrutinise the policy. What we can't do is scrutinise individual cases. But your point's well made. I'm sure it'll be fed back. And I'm sure you will be looking with interest when the policy comes out for scrutiny.
I will. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you, Joey. Okay, so moving on quickly, item 11, the annual scrutiny report.
Thank you, Chair. This report is essentially your once a year chance as overviewing scrutiny to kind of showcase to the rest of the council the work you've been doing and the impact you've had. And with that in mind, it'd be good to hear if you think there's anything that needs adding or where maybe we need a more accurate version of it or somewhere we could better express something. So I'm very happy to have any suggestions for improvements.
Okay, so my request is again, if you can, if there's anything you want to feed into Mark, if you can do that within a week to give Mark time to do what he needs to do and make any amendments. If they're non-controversial amendments, then well, normally Mark will just send them to us, myself and the Vice, and if we think it's more controversial, then we'll make sure they're circulated because this is your report as well. Are people happy with that approach? Okay, so anything to Mark would be appreciated. Okay, so moving on to item 12, which is the update from the Leisure Management Contract Task and Finish Group. Councillor Forashewski, if I ask you to start off, and if there's any technical stuff, we can go into that, and then if we need to, a summary at the end.
Yeah.
Do you happy with that as
yes, and I believe we have Sally Seymour from Leisure on.
Oh, suddenly come back. We thought we lost everybody. Okay, so Mary, please, I think as the chair for that.
Thank you, Chairman, and members, please forgive me for reading from script, but because this is such an essential piece of work, I don't want to miss anything. And you're quite right, Sally's here this evening to support us because Tasman's away. So what I would just like to start off by saying is go back to the beginning at the March meeting, this committee delegated authority to the group to write its interim scoping document. The group is now asking the committee to ratify that choice. The scoping document highlights a timeline for the March-April 2023, when the final report can go before Services ONS and the Executive and the Council. As the procurement process is a very long process, and this is why it's taken a very long time to get there. However, the aim will be to have an interim recommendation ready in the next few weeks and a final report in September. The Leisure Task and Finish Group met on the 11th of May. It comprised of 5 officers, Calvin Mills, Tasman McLeod, Sally Seymour, Robin Taylor and Mark Mills, plus 2 representatives from SLC, which is the Sport Leisure Culture Consultants. They were Toby Kingsbury and Gabby Sims. There were 4 cross-party members, councillors, myself, Jenny Outs, Jerome Davison and Michelle Michaela Weeks. The role of the Task and Finish Group is to look in depth at the current leisure management contract for Waverley, its 5 leisure centres, which expires in June 2023, and the need for a new contract to be in situ in 1st of June 2023. Because of the sheer size and scale of the contract, the Task and Finish Group will meet regularly. The review will ensure the contract process is transparent, it will engage fully with councillors and officers, and it will feed back to this committee their findings. The Task and Finish Group is aiming to conclude its task and finish by September 2022. I cannot stress enough that because of the lengthy procurement process, there's a lot of words there, and the sheer volume of the work and the time needed and the role of the task and the finish group is fundamental to ensure that full, open, transparency scrutiny that would not have been possible through services O&S if it had not, sorry, let me repeat that. I cannot stress enough that because of the lengthy procurement process and sheer volume of work at this time needed for the role of the task and the finish group is fundamental to ensure full, open transparency, scrutiny that could not possibly have happened through this body purely because of the time. That's not to say it could not have been done, but the amount of officer and councillor time with the procurement timeline would put a huge amount of pressure and unrealistic expectations on a project of this scale and importance. We started our meeting with a presentation from SOA. They outlined the proposed procurement process and the areas proposed to be included in the tender process. We looked at reviewing the existing contract. Members will review the current contract, outline what is good and what needs to be strengthened. Places Leisure is the current operator. The current contract is forward-thinking for its time, with an emphasis on a strong partnership approach aligned to the council's corporate strategy. Expectations of the contract are based around continuous improvements and quality management. There is freedom around the pricing with the concessionary pricing in place. Concessionary access is funded through cost subsidy. Waverley Borough Council and Places for Leisure have a 50-50 profit sharing above a certain level and a shared risk on utilities. Waverley Borough Council and Places for Leisure branding appear in all marketing materials and rolling 5-year business plan is in situ. The strategic objectives of the new contract goes far beyond leisure. They should include quality service, financial sustainability, increased participation in leisure, physical activity, increased partnership by less active groups, delivery of a service commonly setting, supporting health and wellbeing, climate change, awareness, a workforce, a cleaning and maintenance contract, and successful developments taken on a project of the role manager. It was felt that the word leisure conjured up a certain image that would suggest centres could be renamed to think of things like communities, wellbeing hubs, sports, activity hubs. Leisure just conjured up an image that would suggest it was leisure that they'd be going there for and actually not going to work out at the gym. Members also suggested that dementia, mental health and loneliness be considered in the contract as well as areas of recognition. This is your word.
Atrial.
Yeah, fibrillation. And that was your suggestion. There is scope to reuse, donate old equipment. We were advised this is already done and would be written into the contract. The scope of the services. The new Cranley Leisure Centre in Year 4, Cranley, Farnham, Godalming and Hazelmere are all included in the scope, but the Edge is excluded. Concerns were raised about Section 106 funding for Cranley Leisure Centre, that if it happens, but if it doesn't happen, if Section 106 monies don't come through, what's going to happen? But it's also recognised that successful leisure centres yield profitable income, and the Cranley Leisure Centre is a great investment opportunity for Waverley. Calvin also explained that there would be a working group and a task and finish group set up to look at the building refurbishment works, and the focus of this group was to look at the contract and the contract in isolation, not to get it confused with ongoing works about a new leisure centre. And again, there was cross-party support for the new build. Other suggestions to be included or considered with the scope were active community programmes. This needed to be clearly focused and targeted. The use of council and parish owned green spaces and other land. And again, I'll come back to Councillor Alts, who was very forthcoming in her comments and contributed extremely well to the meeting, specific villages in area of deprivation. And a reminder, again, that 25% of the population is in 27 of the villages. Operators should be playing a signposting and facilitating role. Social value, which brings local employment and skills development, employment opportunities for disadvantaged people, apprenticeship schemes that lie within the council's existing partnership scheme at Waverley Training Services, voluntary organisations and opportunities, staff wellbeing, diversionary activities, crime reduction, working with the third sector, carbon reduction, local chain supply, youth provision, a place to meet. The key performance indicators currently have fairly conventional KPIs, a number, including numbers that go through the door. It was emphasised that there was a need to measure delivery against the strategic objectives, the use of Quest, which is Ofsted for leisure centres, to obtain satisfaction and customer relation data. Use of benchmarking systems, Sport England, and gain data about people who don't use the service and why. Data needs to be collected by an independent organisation to ensure a non-biased result. Links to community transport were mentioned. In the procurement strategy, it's important to balance the requirement of Waverley Borough Council and the needs and attractiveness to the market. SLC have some recommendations, a 10-year with a 5+5 term. So you could be looking at a minimum of a 15-year contract with this leisure contract. Costs are constantly being monitored and investigated. The scoping document, which is what we're asking you to look at tonight, has been circulated to all members of this committee prior to the meeting. Members were reminded that this group, as I've said before, is looking at the leisure statement contract. It is not the role of the task and finish group to look at the design and the rebuild of a new leisure centre in Cranwell. When the time is right, this area of work will have its own working group and its own task and finish group. The officer's report has 2 recommendations on page 199 for your approval. Item 2, 2.1 and 2.22. And once I've concluded my presentation, I'll be handing over to Mark to talk about that in more depth. And finally, the task and finish group will meet this Thursday at 9:30 with the focus of service specification and KPIs. Members, forgive my mumbling speech, it's late and I'm tired and one thing and another. But thank you for listening, and a special thanks to Sally for stepping in at such short notice, and to members for you this evening, and to all those members on the task and finish group whose contribution has really far exceeded expectation. So thank you, Chairman, and thank you, members. My final comment is just to say that the amount of work and the amount of time going into this is absolutely phenomenal. I mean, we spent an awful lot of time on it. This committee in isolation couldn't cover it. So it really did need to task and finish group to be able to bring information to this, and we will continue to do that. So, Chairman, thank you for your time and thank you for
well, I think our thanks should go to the group for doing such a fantastic job. This is exactly what scrutiny should be about, to make sure things are good, the best we possibly, that we strive for excellence. And I think the work that you've all done, I think has been absolutely outstanding. Officers, elected members, combined as being, and it's also good to see it's a good spread, and it's not a political bias or a geographical bias. It's a really good spread as well. So my sincere thanks to you, and I'm sure we will record that. I've obviously seen this before, and I'm more than happy. So I'm happy to support it. Has anybody got any?
I think Mark wanted to come in and just briefly talk about the recommendations.
Yeah, particularly about sort of next steps, because I think as Councillor Ferret actually said, this is a bit of a sort of juggernaut, and the sort of speed at which it needs to move is kind of ill-fitting with the regular committee cycles. So in an effort to sort of square the desire to make recommendations when they're still useful, keep the parent committee, i.e. yourselves, in the loop, and avoid having to have a special ONS meeting next week, essentially. My suggestion would be that after the group has met this Thursday, it produces interim recommendations. Those are shared with the committee members, and that they are then sent on to Councillor Mirrlees as the sort of big portfolio holder with oversight of the process for her response. And then you confirm those retrospectively at
assuming that you're happy with them at the September meeting. It's a slightly awkward way of doing things, but I think it's probably
sometimes. Well, it's not awkward if it's good for business to continue the momentum, then it's a good process rather than waiting just for our next meeting to come and so it's not be driven by a process. We've given you the authority to crack on as a group, so that's what you do. You send them out unless we have exception and we support it, and then just record in the minutes of the next meeting that's what we had done. So we've got the two recommendations, which are on page 199. I'm sure everybody's supportive of that, and with the commentary that Mark's just given as well.
And if anyone's got any technical questions, Sally has waited all this time, and I'm sure if there's anything you wish to add, we'd be very welcome to hear it. Any questions that are technical, Sally?
It's one of them coming. I was just going to tease you about the lengthy process, but that won't. It's too late.
It is too late.
I just wanted you to explain it to me.
So maybe
it is.
No, we don't really go and talk about procurement.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Payback time. Payback time. My little stutter I could pay off now. No,
I wonder, Mark, whether we need a recommendation, just what we just said, that the task group continues, makes its recommendations, and so it's actually shown that we agreed as a recommendation.
So 2.3 saying
that just to cover it, so it's a clear audit trail on that. Now, it's just one thing I just need to just confirm before we finish. Going back to number 8, biodiversity action plan, although we didn't technically go through the two recommendations. So the first one was that we provide feedback and comment on the current version of the policy, which we did. So we obviously agree with that. The second one says the committee recommends the biodiversity policy, subject to feedback and comment amendment, is considered for adoption by the council, the next available executive. Now, my question will be, there were some quite substantial issues raised, which I think we need to see what that looks like. I don't think we can recommend a policy going before we've seen actually how it's been amended. So whether we say that we don't recommend that until we've seen how that amendments, what they look like.
Yeah, or maybe we just, instead of talking about the committee recommending it one way or another, just ask that your comments are considered and responded to.
Yeah, because I think we should see what that covers. We spent an hour talking about it.
Absolutely.
And then we can find the policy there's no resemblance to what we've said.
And there's no definition.
But having said that, he did say this is a document which is evolving through time, and it will do, because as time goes on, and as he said, some of the data to be collected will be collected because it was actually in the policy.
Yeah, and I do think I agree. It is a living document, but I think you have to have a document that's ready that then becomes what you amend. I think there's just so many gaps in this.
I agree with that. I mean, what's special about the September, so the next executive meeting? Why does that have to be presented at that meeting? That would.
We've had this before and complained about it, because if we take the trouble to read the documents, put in our comments, we should then have the feedback from the executive before we agree. And there's no earthly point in not doing that, because what does the word consider mean? I mean, they could look at it for a nanosecond, or they could spend hours looking at it. We don't know. But if they look at it for a nanosecond and just go noted, 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 and nothing happens to the document, what is the point of our whole process?
Sorry, if say, Chair, I will put that in the kind of scrutiny tracker, so you will get a formal response, so you can see. And that the practice seems to be, if they want to deviate from what you're suggesting, they will try and justify why they're doing that.
The current practice is that all the documents have been rushed through, and we haven't had a chance to scrutinise them. I mean, this is not the first time this has happened. The times that we've scrutinised documents, and in fact, one document was on the website consultation before we'd even seen it, you know, so there is a habit of doing this, it's not a one-off.
And I think there's some big issues about finance, resource implications, and spend profile, which we should always have. It might change, and that's the thing where it's a living document, it will change, but we haven't even started with what we think it's going to cost or what we think the resource implications or what the profile is. And I think you almost have to have a starting point, and then as those change, go up and down. That's why it's a living document. But we, you know,
yeah, sorry, Chair. I think it's important that we get this started to collect the data. And from what Mr. Councillor Darcy was saying, this legislation coming in, and we're going to have make a plan. We need to, at an earlier stage, get the data actually collected. And potentially, the longer that we look to leave it, it may, in actual fact, give us less time to actually collect the data. So, whilst we did say about, you know, let's have the data, and we were informed that the data would be collected, I think we need to kick that off.
And it's,
so
not, it's not just about data, it's about
absolutely.
And I think there is some information that should be in there. There'll be some that we just cannot get at this stage because it's got to be collected. But we should know, we must have some idea what it's going to cost.
Well, as Councillor Seaborn suggested, you know, that there, you know, we do need to understand what that cost is. And I'm not saying we shouldn't have the cost. It is because of what Councillor Darcy was saying. We need to get this data collected sooner rather than later.
Oh, I absolutely agree.
I wouldn't want this document to be held on until the end of the year before it then gets to the executive.
Well, I don't think we're asking at the end of the year. I think there's some basic information that should be in the document that then becomes the template to take it forward. I'm not sure we've got enough. I personally just think this is so many issues that we have no idea, and that's our starting point. We should be able to do a spend profile. Surely they must be able to do a spend profile. We must know what the resource implications are and what that's going to cost. We must know what we're going to fund or what we're going to go for grants. So there's some of that we must know, and that shouldn't be too difficult to put in that report. I think we need that a little bit more. To me, if it goes to the executive and council without that information, well, what is it telling us in the report? We've put something through that we have no idea what the implications are. You know, we've got all the amendments that we've got for Broadwater Park, for all the different places. That should be done before it goes to the executive. Otherwise, we're putting a flawed document in. I'm not saying it's going to be a perfect document, and it won't be. And there's going to be gaps still in it. But what gaps we do know, well, actually those gaps should be filled before we start. And ones we can't, well, we accept that.
I think whatever this is, whatever it comes out of, the point is that 2.2 says we recommend the policy and we recommend that it's considered for adoption. Or that, so it's asking us to recommend the policy that we can't, we simply can't do it.
We need to change that.
Yeah.
And I think that the whole list of things, and the value of this committee is that list of things that you are recommending that they are looked at and responded to. So I think it's going to, I mean, I don't know that we've got time to sort of go through all that recommendation, but if Mark's put something together with Kim and make something that you're happy with, the strength of those recommendations are to say that, you know, well, maybe you can't recommend it approval at this stage, but following these things that you've discussed, you'd like some response. And there is a process, don't forget that the chairs and vice chairs of the two overview scrutiny committees go to executive briefing at the end of this process, and then they respond on every, do you remember they go through every point that will be in that recommendation, and they have to, as Mark says, say whether they're going to agree it or not.
So could I just say to the point that it's an organic document, it absolutely is an organic document. We're going to be living with it forever. So it is organic, it will be changed, but what we're being asked to do here as a scrutiny committee is what you said, Chairman, and we can't. So it has to be something different that we...
So let's see if we can get the answers to the questions and some of the amendments to the areas and different bits and pieces.
I mean, I think at the end of the day, this is leading to work next year because things won't be budgeted for this year. So as long as you can get it through this committee in time for it to feed into the budgeting process and to the service plans for next year, which should be possible by it coming back in September, because we're already hearing that a lot of the service plans are going to be up in the air because we don't know who the big bosses are at the moment. Well, we're starting to see, but we won't know who the heads of service are, for instance. So, there is breathing space to do that. And so my point was for the plan side of it, to get the plans to a state where they're just much more useful without too much effort. So that naturally does feed into manpower, human resource and costs. So,
when is the budget going to be set? When do they start working on that issue?
So into the autumn, November, December.
Yes, yes, and it'll be a little bit later, when it'll be a little bit after we know what the setup is as well. So we've got even more time, really.
So will September give us sufficient time for that to be amended, for us to consider it and be before the budget? So it can form part of the budget process?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Chairman, just very quickly, and thank you for letting me comment. I think the recommendation as it is could just be slightly altered to add, provided all the points raised at this services ONS as listed by Mark is addressed. So at least we are going forward, but we're not going forward. We are making pressure on to say this, we want this information.
Because we can get it signed off by September, but the budget comes after that, and the budget's agreed in February.
Yeah.
So it shouldn't make any issue.
I was just going to ask, is this not a policy that needs to be adopted by full council?
It will do, yeah.
Because there's a full council meeting on the 18th of October. So I think the target should be to have gone through all of the steps necessary for the council to approve it on the 18th of October, otherwise it can't be integrated into the budget process.
And the costs can then go into that report and then be approved and then go into the budget, which would seem the logical way of doing it. Otherwise we're proving something, we don't know what the costs are, therefore we don't know. Okay, so we'll amend that one. I just wanted to just clarify that just before we finish. Okay, now I do apologise. Firstly, that we've gone on and but I think it's probably been one of the more interesting ONSs. I think. Constructed. We've really made some progress, and I'd like to thank Richard and all the other speakers, Jerry as well, because I think that's put a lot of good information in that we needed to highlight.
Can I say, Chairman, that I was having a little pout, about having to pick up all my stuff and change venues, and just I just felt I should make a point. But this is a much better room for ONS. It's where we used to do ONS round the table, and it's a much better.
I did say as long as they could drag the chair in, so I at least have a comfortable chair. But I think if we can, and we'll have the meetings in here unless there's a reason not to.
It makes it a much.
I much prefer it because you actually.
Yeah, you're engaging with each other
much better. So my apologies for going over, but I think for very good reasons. So if there's no other reasons, we'll conclude the meeting. Thank you, everybody. Oh, see, noisy dog.
I am sorry, I left my microphone on accidentally.
Thanks, Jerry. Good to see you as always.
Good night.
So that's my suggestion.